Lebanon for the second episode of the Beirut Banyan. And this episode begins with a traffic jam. I left Beirut at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, thinking that I would need at most an hour and a half to reach Rayak. And I actually gave myself extra time. I wanted to spend the afternoon in Zahle. And I thought, just after lunch, I can manage it. There wouldn't be that much traffic, and I was completely wrong. I ended up getting stuck in traffic for 3.5 hours. Part of that was due to a truck container that actually fell on the old Damascus road near Shtura. So that was part of the congestion, but that wasn't the entire congestion. Most of it was just traffic and unbearable traffic. And it was the perfect pretext for the interview with Elias Maalouf, founder of Train NGO. We had scheduled the interview at 5:30. Somehow, I made it to Rayak at 5:30, so I was on time. We did the interview at Chateau Rayak, a vineyard that Elias owns and runs, and we did the interview in his wine cellar. Electrical outlet is all I really needed, and of course there was 2 chairs and a desk. Couldn't really do it in the vineyard itself. So we sat down in the cellar, and Elias took me on a journey through time. Now, I'm often skeptical about the charm of train enthusiasts, especially Sheldon Cooper of Big Bang Theory and other train experts that I've met. They don't seem to be the most charming, if you will. Elias is very charming. It might be because of the wine. I mean, he was glowing during the conversation. It's probably a blend of wine and passion. He adores trains. He spent his honeymoon on a steam locomotive. He lives next to the old train station of Rayak. I think a train enthusiast is an understatement. He's an expert, and he's enamored with trains. And he really did a good job at bringing a bit of our history back to life. And I ended up leaving the conversation looking at the train tracks going back to Beirut, looking at the abandoned train stations, and really wanting to recapture that part of our history. I hope you enjoyed today's conversation with Elias Maalouf, founder of Train NGO. The trains helped build Lebanon.
Of course.
Can we get into that a little deeper? What exactly do you mean by build Lebanon?
Trains are built by man, but cities are built by trains, which means there was no Hamdoun before having a railway. There was no Alai, there was no Rayak. Rayak was built by the railways purely because if you see, before having a railway, we had no airport, we had no infrastructure. We had a small town with 1 or 2 churches and 10 houses surrounded each one of them. And suddenly, after having a railway system, we had hundreds and thousands of employees working in the railway system, new houses, new buildings, a new city arousing. Less than 10 years after the railways, we had an airport, the biggest in the Middle East for a certain period of time, the Rayak airport. We became a big city.
So and you owe this to the train network.
Of course.
You know, I've never heard that before. It's interesting. I always assumed that there was a village, Hamdoun, and that the train was deliberately brought there. I didn't think of it as the train created what we call Hamdoun today.
No. We have a steep mountain in Lebanon. So the engineers working on bringing the railways were working hard to try to find the easiest way for the railway to climb up the mountains. So even though they found the easiest way, but it was the hardest way in the world. So we had the highest slope of a train climbing a mountain between Haraya and Alai for a long period of time.
Oh, the highest slope
in the world.
You're kidding.
Yes. That's why we had special trains that no longer exist anywhere else in the world. They were made specially for Lebanon, which we asked for them to be preserved in a museum, not just because we like to have a museum and it's the thing. No, we want to preserve them because They were the trains that climbed the highest slopes in the world for a certain period of time. Of course, now we have highest and steepest slopes, but the trains that we have in Lebanon, especially in 1895 until 1900s, 1920s, we had the highest slope, yes.
So let's then go back to the late 19th century. This is Ottoman Beirut. This is still Ottoman Empire. That there's a heavy investment in rail network, and the mountains of Lebanon are of interest. And that's, I think, it's almost impossible to imagine today that this part of the world was so advanced in trains and rail network that it's almost unthinkable today that we could even try to do that again. Well, why were the 1890s important for this part of the world, in particular rail? Why was that? Why were we excelling in that sort of dramatically?
Okay, we came late to the railway network, to the railway lines of the world. We came late, but when we suddenly arrived to the railways, when Britain had the rails almost 60 to 70 years before us, we suddenly became equal once we had the railway line, which was firstly a project by Lebanese. So people say, no, a Frenchman came and built our railways. Yes, sir, a Frenchman came and built our railways. His name is Comte Edmond du Pertuis, but he came after Hassan Bayhom and Yusuf Bek al-Matran, who came and they established a company, and they took the concession from the Ottomans, and they got the investment, and suddenly...
So sorry, these were local investors that took...
Of course,
okay.
they are local investors who came and they invested with their money. One who had a lot of land here between Baalbek and Rayak, and another one who had a lot of land in Beirut, and they had a lot of interest. They've been traveling around the world. They know what's like having a railway, and for them it was something for their country that they don't have a railway. They needed this for their investments, for their work.
So this was a bottom-up initiative from local...
Of course.
That's incredible.
Yes, most of the people don't understand that who invested the first in the railways. It was Yusuf Bek al-Matran and Hassan Bayhom, and afterwards Comte Edmond du Pertuis, who owned the port of Beirut, who invested in the port of Beirut, and who invested also in the lines of the carriage lines. It's called the diligence. He made the line of the diligence. He found, okay, I have the port, I have the diligence. Why shouldn't I be part of the railways? So he became the main contributor. But it was happening, with or without the Comte du Pertuis. And I have to say, for us as an NGO, I love Comte Edmond du Pertuis. He is the father of transportation in Lebanon, because he had established the most important establishments for transportation. But we also have to give credits for our good people who came and worked. Even in Tripoli, by the way. Tripoli, what happened is Tripoli was the most important city in our region. Beirut was considered rank 2, Tripoli rank 1.
Yeah.
There was no Rayak.
Right.
Damascus was rank 2 for the Ottomans. And by the way, the population of Beirut never exceeded 7,000 to 8,000 before the railways. Suddenly, after the railways, we started having 120,000 people, 200,000 people, and the population of Beirut started booming because of having this, not only the railway, the port of Beirut, the tramway of Beirut, the whole infrastructure of a good network that connects people together. So what happened?
So we owe it to this. We owe it to rail networks,
of course,
for the foundations of the country.
Of course. Usually, before having a transportation system like a network, like a train or a tramway, cities were built by the riversides, because you can transport your wood, your things. You can drink. You can make your agriculture But afterwards, cities started becoming built around the systems, the electricity, the water system, the railway system. So even if you don't have a certain town or a certain city in a certain location, just because you have a highway passing by it, you suddenly see a city arising.
Why was there a particular interest in sort of advancing or finding advanced technology here as opposed to other parts of the world? Is it just because the mountains were an issue, they had to find a way to link the coast to the mountains? Because it's almost odd that this wouldn't have happened in Europe beforehand. It's striking to know that we were
Very late.
very late, but also maybe up to date at the same time.
Suddenly the Ottomans became broke, and they needed the money, and the French investors they said, okay, we would lend you the money, but you have to do something for this region. We try to take the silk from here, we try to take this from here, and because of your corrupt leaders, we can't we have to pay bribes, you have to make a new infrastructure for the region in order for us to trust you and give you and lend you the money. So they lent them the money to start evolving, making something new for Beirut and for the Lebanon. But of course, they were forced to allow projects from people like Comte Edmond du Pertuis, Youssef Bek al-Matran, and Hassan Bayhom to do like the railway lines here.
The Frenchmen you're referring to, this is still Ottoman era. This is pre-French mandate.
Of course.
So when the French mandate, after World War I, when the Ottoman Empire fell, were the French as interested in advancing the rail network?
Of course,
Okay.
of course, yes.
So is that the time where the rail network became central to the Lebanese economy? Was it after World War I that this became a sort of fundamental?
From the first day the railway worked, it became fundamental. Imagine going all the way from Beirut to Damascus and taking 1 week to 2 weeks depending on the climate and the weather, and suddenly in 24 hours and less than 24 hours you ride a locomotive, you go without going into sun, just without being attacked by the weather conditions, the cold and the hot and everything. You just crossing the mountains and having a good time, drinking, eating on a train and going to Damascus.
So these, under the French mandate, the French were tolerant of expanding the rail network.
Yeah.
And even in those days, primarily it was goods, it was carriage, cargo. Passengers using the network, when did that become, let's say, a more important aspect of the rail network? Was it sort of as the population kept growing that this became?
From the first day.
From the first day, there were passengers.
You see what, because it's the cute chaos, I call it. Usually you have cargo trains all around the world, and you have the passenger trains, the commuter trains all around the world. But in Lebanon, what happened is that they used to mix both together. So at the beginning, on the first trails, they used to put the cargo and then the people riding at the end. And they started complaining because they used to, you had the cattle, the sheep, the cows in front of you, and the smell because of the wind coming to you. So they asked them, no, you have to put the wagons of the passengers in front and put everything else behind. So afterwards, because it was a steam train, we had a lot of tunnels on the way. Yes. So they had the chalk in their faces, but it was they talk. People mention this in a funny way. They like it. It was better for than going on by donkey or by camel all the way.
So you could only move around long distance through rail.
Of course.
Now, I've been through these tunnels, and I mean it's a horror film today.
Of course.
Next to Shikka, there's this fantastic tunnel that's, I mean, it's a chapter from our history, and it's full of hyenas and trash. but it's there.
It's good if you have hyenas. Huh?
Maybe, yeah, the hyenas are yeah.
They can still find refuge in something.
So the train now is keeping the wildlife intact.
Yeah.
It shows how far we've gone.
Of course, you go to the train station of Rayak nowadays. You see foxes that you don't see anywhere else. You see the owls. You see the wildlife of the Bekaa.
This is almost
sleeping
beautiful
inside
and
the train
tragic.
station, yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
That these are relics of our past that preserve the natural beauty of the country.
Yes.
Wow.
Yes, they are the Green Line now. During the Civil War, the Green Line was crossing from borders from south to north Beirut. And that line that nobody can walk on became the Green Line because trees suddenly came out and it was the revenge of nature. But now the Green Line of Lebanon is the railway path because they say that they have encroachments, but they're on only 3% of the line. The rest of it is empty, full of bushes and trees and grass, and you're not even allowed to go inside most of the locations.
You know, 3%. When anyone drives out of Beirut today, especially going north, where is that train line? Because I look for it today from Madam Khayel station, pretty much all the way to Tabarja. Where are the tracks? Are they? Because 3% sounds very small.
Yeah, of course. I'm gonna make you a comparison. When you have 304 kilometers of rails, we have 402 kilometers of rails, okay, all around our country, okay, and you have the line between Nahr al-Kalb, the tunnel, all the way to Dawra. That's the only line that hasn't been that has been removed. But at the same time, when it was removed, there was a treaty between the World Bank and the government that if you remove the railway, you have to create a path for the railway because one day you will need those railways. So they created this path, and this path is not used for a railway or anything else.
Where is it?
But it is there.
Where?
Like you see, if you go in Baye, you see between the new city of Baye and the old road, the old highway, you see like a green line. This is it.
So there's a stretch of empty. There's enough land there.
Yes,
to
for having
back.
a railway back. Yes. Let's compare. I always use this comparison, which is comparing Beirut to London. Why?
Yeah, why?
Why? I know you just opened your eyes and
London.
yeah, because it's the city of transportation in the world. It's the Mecca for everybody that believes in transportation, and they study transportation. They say, oh, okay, this is the chosen land for transportation. They go and see double-decker buses, subways, trains, the whole network, and for many people who even study transportation, they say London. But considering a big city of like London, Lebanon, if you try to mix it all together, because you now see the whole city between Beirut and Tripoli, you think it's a big city at the end, because it's all connected together with buildings and everything. And now we're becoming one big city in a small country. The whole country is becoming one big city. And if we compare it to the past, up until today, the network of subways in London is 402 kilometers. The network of transport of railway in Lebanon is 402 kilometers up until now. We haven't updated a new network, a new line. So considering the past and the present today, yes, okay, we were very late in having a railway system. We were almost more than 70 years late. But if you try to compare our country with other like cities that are the size of our country, we were on the right track.
I want to jump a bit out of the French Mandate and go to the years just before the Civil War. Am I correct in saying that the train network was already being used less and less, that the investment was not there, that the government was not paying attention to it before the fighting broke out?
Yes.
Can I? So
Can I explain this point?
please do. Yeah, because but
Because-
I asked it only for one reason, that I think it's almost too easy to consider this nostalgia for something that wasn't maybe functioning well before.
Why?
Yeah, no, I want to dissect that. And I want
We always ask ourselves why, and that's why I'm always proud that our NGO now has most of the answers of most of the questions that are related to the transportation system in Lebanon. Because as an NGO, we're not only working on railway, we're working on buses, and we are working on the whole system. What happened is, in 1960s, the government became so strong, and they said, okay, why don't we buy those big railways and the tramway of Beirut? We are strong. We can do it.
What do you mean? What do you mean by buy?
They bought them from the private companies that they were owned.
Oh, so prior to the 60s, these were private.
They were
Railway.
private railways.
Okay.
So the tramway was bought by the government, and after 4 years, it was stopped by the government.
Yeah, replaced by
Replaced
electric
by
buses. Yeah.
Not electric. They
were-
were not electric buses. They were
These just general diesel.
Just not even. They were like gasoline buses, not even diesel. So.
So there's a jump from a tram to bus.
To a bus, yes. And they said, oh, we're doing things right, so let's stop the railway. And they realized, okay, we want to stop the railway now. What happened?
Oh, so there was a decision to
Yeah,
stop
even during the late 60s, they decided to stop the railways before the Civil War.
it. Yeah.
They made like a big meeting with all the ministers and deputies, and they said, we want to stop the railways. Oh, that's a bright idea. Let's go on and stop the railways. But who didn't believe in this bright idea was the railway workers. So they went on. They got like 10 to 15 trains from Rayak with railway workers and their family all the way to Beirut. And also many trains came from Tripoli and trains came from Saida, and they blocked the highway, and they made a big like strike.
A train protest.
Yes, and they stopped the train on the crossroads of the city, and they went off and they walked towards the parliament, and they were able to stop this. So there was they said, okay, we can't stop the railway. There's a strong syndicate. We can't stop them. So they realized, because the railway workers, they learned from the mistake of the tramway workers. They said, okay, we're going to stop the tramway. You all going to go and work in the electricity company. And suddenly they stopped the tramway, and they realized that most of the tramway workers, they don't have a place to go. The tramways were released. Many of them went to the electricity company, and a few went to the bus company, and a big amount of those workers just had no work to do, nothing to work on.
In your opinion, what was the government's reasoning for stopping tram and rail?
TMA.
So
Which is
TMA, yeah, you can.
yeah, well,
maybe
the
describe
freight,
that.
the freight airplane that used to take the cargo to other locations in the Middle East. Also, you had.
Why would that impact something like the tram network of Beirut?
No, the tramway, it doesn't. The railway was the impact. The tramway, it had a lot of land in Beirut, and they wanted to stop to take over the land of the tramway. Whoever knows where the tramway land went, the stops,
Tram land meaning the station.
the stations, the land that it was owned by the tramway, where it was, where it would go, who owns now those lands. And other than this, people were complaining. You know, Lebanon, every citizen of the world complains. But that doesn't mean if you have an intelligent government, you should go on and go through the complaints of the people. If you're complaining that the tramway is slow and it's blocking the way of the cars, you go and make a faster tramway. You don't go and stop the tramway.
So that the tramway, I've seen footage from the early 1920s, it's the start of the French Mandate, where there's trams all over the city.
Of course.
And the trams began before that. The trams were, I guess this was Ottoman initiated under Ottoman rule, but it took off with the French. After independence, was there a decline from the 40s until the 60s? Was it being used less and less anyway?
Well,
I'm imagining cars would
yes.
eventually intrude on.
Yes, everywhere in the world you had the car revolution.
Yeah.
And what happened is because I told you the railway company became and the tramway and most of the infrastructure became part of the government. So because it's not a privately owned investment, there won't be a motivation to try to bring things faster, to make things push things forward, like happened in France. Because of the car revolution, there was a motivation to make faster trains, not to stop the trains all around the world.
Right.
Because of the car revolution, there was a technology to make silent tramways, to make a good and clean technology of tramways, electric tramways, and we even had those electric tramways, but they make them more comfortable, to make safe pathways, because as you know, the tramways, when the government became in charge of them, they started having a lot of accidents. There was no discipline anymore.
So there was a deterioration.
Of course.
In the maintenance and organization.
In everything.
And all that stuff.
In everything. And you should understand the difference between the tramway before the government and the train before the government. Trains were on time. And tramways were on time.
This is important to emphasize. That,
Yes. Imagine the word عم نترمى. عم نترمى, you know what does it mean? ترمناها يعني قطع التراموي. It means the tramway was crossing, so it crosses at 6:30. Let's see. So نحن عم نترم الوقت. We have to go to eat now.
Wow.
عم نترم الوقت. AUB should stop their class and go to another class because the tramway just crossed next to AUB. The church starts ringing the bell because it's at this time the locomotive will pass by the church, and it's time for prayer, like at 8 or at 10 or at 11.
So people relied on the tram.
Relied on the tramway, on the train,
yeah.
to understand their time. It wasn't easy to have a clock in your hand or in your pocket before.
So it's really going back, at least the way you're describing it, it's going back to the early 60s, where things were still functioning the way they were intended.
Early 60s was the end of this transportation.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Yeah, so
yeah. By the end of the 50s, was like before taking over the government, you start making forcing the companies that own those. You start making taking some measures against them, adding some taxes or interfering in their pathways, in the way they work. At the end, they will say, "Okay, what do you want?"
But do you get the sense?
Buy it.
So do you ever get the sense that there was aside from employees protesting for their own jobs as well, do you get a sense that there was public disinterest after that period, before the war?
Just an example of the tramway Beirut. The day it stopped, you go on the TV and you listen to songs of nostalgia, asking for the tramway to have a Roz Allah Ayyamak ya Tramway Beirut. They made this song in the 60s. So they started missing the tramway as soon as it stopped. Wow. And instead of putting them in museums because they are one of a kind, and you can't find this kinds of tramways because they were made specially for the Middle East, for our region. They were made cafeterias, and they were sold for like a decene, and at the end they were sold for scrap.
was at this moment we were interrupted by a team of journalists from Nahar newspaper. I guess they were also stuck in the same traffic mess, but it was okay because I wanted to get outside a bit and explore Elias's home, his courtyard, his terrace, which feeds into the vineyard itself, and took in the fresh air because you live in Beirut now. It is hard to take a deep breath without coughing. And Rayak, you can take a deep breath and it's so pleasurable. I mean, the air is clean. It isn't so humid. It's actually fairly dry. So you actually see the visibility. You can see the anti-Lebanon mountains to the east. And you can also sort of see the barrier of the train station. It's walled off, so the Lebanese army is there now, and you can't just walk in. But his property is very close to the train station, and I think he found the sweet spot of how to live next to an abandoned train station and tend to his vineyard at the same time. And I was curious about his upbringing, his childhood, his youth, and his passion for trains, where it came from. Elias was a filmmaker, and he was meant to become a filmmaker up until 2005, where his life took a dramatic turn. And it involves the Syrian pullout from Lebanon. And that moment put him on a different path. I'm curious more about your own personal passion. Now, we're sitting right now in your winery. We're sitting in Chateau Rea. And it's a great place to call home.
Yeah.
You have wonderful views, you have clean air, and you have wine everywhere. It's not bad. This is also next to the train station of Rea. So you have a great view of both the mountains in the distance and pretty much the old train station, which is just beyond here. But you're from here. Is being from here your own is it childhood wonder and curiosity that took you to this, or am I just making this too romantic? And
it's always romantic to go far and create an NGO, and it's always about romance and passion. But what brought me to this is I wasn't born in Rayak. I wasn't born in Lebanon. I was born in Ecuador. And I was born by the nostalgia of my parents coming back to Lebanon.
I see.
So because my parents were from this amazing city they called Riyadh. Oh, will you come back to Lebanon? When we go back, we have cinemas next to the house. We have nightclubs. We have a train station.
Sorry, that was here.
Yes. We had we have a train station. We have an airport. You go from a city to another city. I was living in downtown Quito, which is a city, and coming back. When we came back to Lebanon, we said, "Oh my God, where are you taking us, Dad?" All those Syrian stops and the Syrian military.
This
stops.
was during
in
the Civil War?
1992. We came
so
back.
just after, I see.
Yeah, just after the Civil War, and hey, Dad, where's the train station? You're not allowed to look towards the train station because it was already a military base for the Syrians.
Right.
Where are the cinemas? They were closed.
So how old were you back in that?
I think 11, 12 years old.
So you're just, I'm guessing you had seen trains running before, and you knew that this is a train station.
No.
Oh, so you had not seen...
No, because the same corruption that stopped the railways of Lebanon also had stopped the trains of Ecuador. And I always dreamed that we will have the trains back in Lebanon, just like the trains are back in Ecuador.
So both countries that you called home at some point lost their train networks.
Yes.
Wow.
Yes. And both countries had the most difficult trains of the world. Ecuador, they had a train that goes up to Quito, which is 3,500 meters away from the sea high. It's a high mountain. So the big example of having a train climbing the mountains of Lebanon I had a bigger example in Quito, but it was a later example. It happened after the trains of Lebanon. You had new technologies. They didn't cross high slopes because they made it like a snake hike, which is it's not a direct hike. So it's it was the same, you know. But my passion wasn't there. I was a filmmaker. I was finishing my last year in university, and I was asked to do a documentary. And what was better than doing a documentary of the Syrians leaving Lebanon in 2005? So I started filming our campaigns from the university towards Saht al-Najmi. Then I realized, hey, they're leaving Rayak. Why don't I go and start filming? And that's when I first saw the railway for the first time.
It's amazing. I mean, I think a lot of us that did not grow up here, that grew up on the coast, we got used to life without the Syrian army earlier because they had left already.
Yeah, but
so it's easy to forget that they were still here.
They were still here,
and they were very present.
They were here to stay, and even when they left, they say "ila liqa," which means we're coming back. So I entered to the train station and I was filming. I was young. I had all my
so they had pulled out and nobody had took it over yet.
No. They were still packing.
Oh, they were packing. Okay.
And I went with my camera, and I was very young.
Yeah. You must, I'm guessing, early mid-20s.
Yeah, early mid-20s, and I was like finishing my university, and I want to take this footage of the Syrians leaving my country. This is a historical moment of my life, and suddenly I see like they are burning something inside one of the wagons. I waited for a certain, like 20 minutes, half an hour, and they left. Their big truck went between two buildings. I said, okay, they left. That's why I'm telling you I was very young. So I entered between, I went to the wagon that was burning, and as I entered to the wagon, I realized that they were burning the archives, the beautiful archives, the beautiful maps of the train station, everything.
Kidding. So those were still there.
They were still there, and they were burning the sketches of the locomotive, everything. So I was like, what should I do? Should I still record? Should I stop recording? Should I save the archives? We understand the importance of this.
Of course.
So I started to handle the archives from the wagon.
Wow.
I burned my hands, and I started like shouting like this, and behind me was still the truck between the two buildings. I thought they were there, and they went out from the truck, and they started like up in the air and said, oh, what the fuck, I should run now. You should run now. And as a young guy and full of energy, my feet my feet were just tapping my butt as I ran away fast, and they went back to the archives, and they stopped there, and they kept waiting until the last archive was burned. Wow. What happened? I only had some of the archives.
You were able to take some of it with you?
Take some of my archives in the bag of my camera. So I said, what should I do now? It's my fault. Even though I didn't burn them, but I should have waited for them to go. I could have saved more archives. So I started gathering pictures. I started gathering stories. I started gathering everything. And suddenly I had the archives. I started meeting people who are interested. Okay, let's work together, guys. Let's do an NGO. We have to save the planet, save Lebanon, save the railways.
So this is the most obvious example I've heard of I don't know if civil society is the right word here, because this should be just standard governance, but whatever you want to call it, this is the most obvious example of something emerging from those days, from those protests, and from the country almost reaching a moment where it could be on its own 2 feet once again. And here you have a man in his early 20s trying to rescue burned footage and archives from a burning train station because you care so much about this country and about its history. And this is a fascinating fascinating story where you're risking your own well-being
I was too young to understand this.
But old enough also to know what you're doing.
No, not even.
No, you don't.
It's just passion that's driving you around.
So you must be okay. Go on.
Yeah, it's like goofy, you know.
Well, it might be irresponsible, but it's also well-intentioned.
Yes, it is an irresponsible thing that to do. There's always an intelligent way to work things out, but when things happen, you just have to work around things, you know. They were burning something. I was very curious, and curiosity killed the cat, you know.
But
and
you survived.
It almost killed me.
It almost killed you. What were the archives? What did you actually find?
The archives had you had the maps of the railways. You had documents of the things that were in the railway company in Rayak, in the warehouses. You had drawings of the railway parts. They burnt.
But do you have any clue why these would be burned?
Of course. The train station was stolen.
And why would they be burning archives that have nothing to do with their footprint?
It's the evidence of what we had there. Sometimes this could be part of their ignorance also, you know.
Oh yeah, I was curious if they're just burning everything. This
No,
could
no,
include
no,
things
no.
that
They didn't burn everything. They just burnt archives.
But you preserved these things, and what did you do with them? Did you took them and you?
No. I took like a very, 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 very few documents, like 4 or 5 documents that were even burnt. If you go to their historical importance, they have almost nothing on them. But it's on my history in train. They signify a lot. But what happened afterwards is this guilt trip that played me to work on getting archives. I traveled around the world to get archives for Lebanese railways.
Oh, so you had to leave Lebanon to get
archive? Yeah, of course. I went to London to some journalists who came and write articles before the Civil War. I went I went all the way to Arizona to make an interview with a journalist who came to Lebanon and write. He put us in an article of the Steam Locomotive magazine. I interviewed 70 of the railway workers, and the funny thing is...
But sorry, Elias, this is out of your own pocket?
Yeah.
So you spent your own money on trying to preserve...
Yeah, it's I don't look at it as money, you know. It's... I was a gold digger at that time. It's not like I'm paying money to buy gold. No, I was digging for gold. I was a gold digger at that time. So I was like I was going around searching for railway workers who still were still alive, and I interviewed them, and the mysterious thing is that most of the railway workers, just after the interview, they passed away. They died. It's like they were waiting for me to take their testimony, and they just died. I took their death very personal. At the first time, I thought it was me. I'm the prophet of trains. I've been asked to go and interview this guy before he dies or something, but it's very weird what happened, how things happened. Of course, just 2 or 3 of those railway workers are still alive.
I noticed actually there was a clip that I found online with him. I think he's maybe in his early 90s now. Yeah, his name escapes me. He was actually, I think, based on in this station here.
Yes, Asad Namroud. Yes,
right.
He's still alive. Yeah.
So you managed to keep the other stories alive. I mean, you've interviewed up to 70 employees.
Yeah.
And were they all as passionate about trains as you?
They were ready. If just the government says okay, they were ready to help for free, to give their knowledge to help. People who worked in the railway, they were very passionate. They were very, very passionate. You know, they had this ego that they are the pilots of a train. They used to walk like a rooster, you know, with their head up high, and they were the thing. They had the highest allowance, and they were paid the highest in of all the workers in Lebanon. They had a living, you know. They used to buy the land. They earned a living from working in the railway. Working in a railway, it's not like you want to be a train driver. You can be. It took you 8 to 9 years to be able to drive a train.
But these 70 that you interviewed, were most of them out of work before the Civil War due to the downsizing and...
Imagine I made interviews of... I made a couple of interviews with one of those workers who retired even before the Civil War. So they had the testimony of the First World War.
Oh, wow. You were able to interview
I was
a World War I train conductor.
Train conductor.
Wow.
Train worker. Not
Oh, well,
conductor,
okay, yeah.
Railway worker.
Yeah.
Because in order to be conductor, I told you it takes like 8 years of experience for them to allow you, but he was already a railway worker in the First World War.
Ago. You were able to... Wow.
Yes, it's because I started interviews in 2005. So
you mentioned in an interview that you were trying to bring the Betroun to Jbel link back up because most of it is there and it's not that difficult to do that. I'd like to just know your own experience in sort of getting into the Lebanese state and how they treated you and how they treated the subject, because there's no one else I think that knows the stumbling blocks as much as you.
It's very important to understand that all this mentioned is the work of an NGO. I can't go and say that I want to bring the line back from Betroun to Jbal if I didn't have the support and the backup and the intelligence and the engineering of the train NGO.
So you helped start, or you started this NGO, and you brought a team of engineers on board to make it I'm guessing a serious feasibility thing that you could take and say, this is doable. What was the reaction?
Okay, up until we asked for this, Train was just an NGO. Mm-hmm. But once we asked that we want to restore a line, that's when we saw how we understood how the government works and how we became the enemies of the system.
It's tragic in itself that an NGO is asking a government to rebuild a rail network. Should not even be the job of an NGO.
We're not even asking the government. We don't. We at the beginning we were asking the government. Yeah. Then we understood. Okay, if the person who runs the railway company has never seen a railway running in his life. He's never read a railway. He doesn't know how to read a map of the railway. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Who are you asking? You're not asking something rational. And with all my respect to all the railway workers who I really respect and I really honor, and even the hard work of someone to become managing the railway company, people make fun of the idea that there is a manager for the railway company. And that's not because of his post, but it's because of nothing happening since he's been in this post.
So you were talking to that person.
That person, and we tried. We said, "Okay, welcome aboard. You're the new railway manager." And he became a railway manager because we made a big strike. We had like 600, 700 bicycles all the way, all around Beirut, and we came in front of the train station and we started shouting, "Ya tren, mashi tren, ya tren, mashi tren." And 2 or 3 weeks afterwards, we had a new railway manager. We said, okay, this is our opportunity to help the system come back.
Right.
We never thought that we should be fighting the system or be against the system, because if you want a railway to happen, you need a railway company to be there. You can't just think that if you go and attack a railway company, you will be able to support the idea of having a railway. No, you have to make the railway company a strong company, help her to stand and become a strong company. And then if you want to have a railway back, it will happen. And we made the study with our team, and we decided, hey guys, let's make a pilot of the railway coming back. We gathered all our engineers. We made a nice study of a prototype of a railway line that has bridges like any other part of the rail. It has encroachments like any other railway part of and it has strong encroachments of deputies and ministers. It has missing lines like any other railway line. It has several train stations. It has tunnels. It has everything. So why we chose Betroun, Jbal, for a reason that if we as an NGO, and we didn't want to label it as a work of our NGO, we at the beginning we proposed this, that the railway company will be doing this with our NGO silently helping it in order to make a successful railway company. We asked the government, we have the connections to get the money.
Yes. So the money was there. Money was ready.
No. We signed confidential agreement with the donors.
Yes.
That we will go and ask for this. Don't let us down, because we already have this confidential agreement. One of the people, he said, okay, I'm ready to donate $2 million alone from my personal pocket, but I don't believe that you will get okay.
So you had individual donors?
Individual donors, companies, Lebanese immigrants, everybody wanted to fund this project.
Wow.
And we made, we had the credibility. We, as an NGO, we never were we got from 2005 up until today, the NGO has never raised more than $5,000 in all its life, and all the money was used for printing a poster or printing an exposition or something like that. That's all. We've been surviving with no money, and we've been having supporters. And now the NGO, it's not about a person called Elias Maalouf, no, because Elias Maalouf left the NGO 2 years ago, and it's still working, and it's still very active, and it's very strong. And because I believe we will never have our Lebanon back if we don't have our railway back.
It seems like there was a moment where things lined up, where everything that could go right went right. That you had people, you had momentum, you had money, and you had something that is feasible. What happened?
They just didn't sign the papers to allow us to go and do the thing.
Okay. Now, I know this may be a sensitive subject because there are, I'm more interested in what your thoughts are on what their reluctance was, because it almost seems like it's a win-win situation for everybody. Lebanon gets a rail network back. Train did its job. The government now has something to be proud of, which is that they're now running the train network again.
It's a 17.5 kilometer railway line that we were able to, in our studies, we asked the government to give us only 3 months to build it back.
So it would. Okay. So this is even worse now. What do you think their reluctance was? Where does it come from?
Geopolitics.
So the Jbel Batroun link would hurt who exactly? And I mean, you don't need to if you're.
I've never been afraid in my life to say the truth, and there's nothing to be afraid of. But I'm telling you, up until now, I just don't understand these people. They.
But you said geopolitics. What do you mean by that exactly?
Geopolitics. Who's benefiting from Lebanon not having a railway back? Just think of it.
We can let's leave the train network for a moment. Let's go to something that is extremely dysfunctional, but still running to a certain degree. Here, miraculously, it's 24 hours. The rest of the country, it's not, which is electricity. Would you link it to the same kind of issue that the inability to have electricity for a few million people in one country is the same problem that we don't have? Yeah. Would you link it to the trash crisis? Would you link it to environmental decay and
can I explain? They refused Batroun Jbel. We pressed charges against the railway company.
Oh.
Against Majlis Shura al-Dawla.
Okay.
And we lost the case. Although we had evidence from a lot of TV interviews with us and the railway company, we had everything to show, and we have our certificates from the Ministry of Interior that we are an NGO that is allowed to work on this issue. And suddenly the judge say, you have nothing to do with this issue, you are not allowed to ask for this, and he returned our case. And what we did, we had the plan B to make an enormous strike in Beirut, and we were planning this. It was in the 120 years of railway of Lebanon. It was in 2015, 3rd of August. The plan was to make, we were building a huge locomotive, a replica of one of the German trains that we have. We had the plans, we had everything. We even got also the potential donors to help us build this train. And we were gonna build this train and push it from the train station of Marim Khail up until the Parliament of Lebanon. And this was gonna be pushed on the first track, and afterward it was gonna be pushed all the way to the Bekaa. We are still this strong to do this, but why we stopped suddenly, and just before we started building the train, only 3 months before, the trash
the You Stink
protest began. Yeah. And we were networking with all the NGOs, and they said, please, train, you should stand next to us with this issue, because this is a more important issue. And it was really more important than the railway. People are getting sick because of the trash. Our country was in a big garbage bag, and it was bad for our image. We were in the news everywhere, so we decided to stop our strike and
I'd like to
focus on the trash crisis. And all our NGO members were part of the strike.
But I'd like to maybe go back on this geopolitics again. I would agree that the fact that the state does not exist the way it once existed, it may not have been the most functional state in the 50s or 60s. And you eloquently described a state that was sabotaging its rail network anyway in the 1960s and early 70s, that it was actually scaling it back and making it almost defunct, but that it was something that was maybe more responsible and more able to cater to things like transportation and electricity and all that. Geopolitics has prevented Lebanon from functioning since 1975. maybe that includes all of these issues. But it's odd that Byblos to Betrun, which should be on no one's radar. I mean, this is a fairly sparse population. The rail is still there for the most part. It doesn't seem to ruffle anyone's feathers in my mind. I can't think of why regional instability would sort of have any impact on a little train route from that small sliver of land. But that maybe shows just how impossible it is to have anything work properly in this country. That if you cannot even have Byblos to Betrun running, then the expectations are so low that in 2019, I mean, it's going to be like this for maybe decades to come. Why in 2029, even though maybe you have optimism, which is good, that train is still running, that you have people still passionate about this subject, but the chances of there being a train network in 2029 seem to be very small. Or 2039, 2049. I mean, the farther away we go from 1895, the less chance we have of a train running. I don't want to sound too pessimistic here, but...
Yes, and no.
Okay, well, that's why it's train,
yes,
right?
Yes, and no. I can't be thinking this way and coming back to my land and making a winery here and trying even, it's not easy to start a business. I'm not starting a business in Beirut, in the city. So hope is what brings back a country. And I will keep my hope. And no one can stop this hope, even if I die.
You know, this is actually maybe something that we both remember, which is just after the Civil War, the train that was still running from Beirut to, I remember it going to Jounieh, but I think it may have gone even further, if I'm not mistaken.
No, you're mistaken, because it was the train that built Beirut after the Civil War, because this is the train that brought the baton from Shikka to Solidaire, to downtown Beirut. So it was rebuilt for this reason. It wasn't rebuilt for for me and you.
There was a green train.
Yes,
with
that
passengers.
The train with passengers was an orange train called the Automotrice.
Yes,
the green train had wagons for freight. The orange train was just it was called the train of the sea, the Bahar train, where people use it during Sunday to go to swim in Mameltain from Beirut. It was an occasional train used for schools up until they realized they can sell it for scrap, and they sold it before they stopped functioning the railway line.
Elias, did you ever ride one of those trains in the early 90s?
No, not in the early 90s. I rode one of those trains. We sneaked into a railway station in 2011. I had a friend of mine who was also doing a documentary of her grandfather, who was of her uncle, who was a railway worker. We sneaked in. We got some batteries. We turned on those trains, which are Polish trains. And at that time, the train wasn't a military base for any of the militants that are now in the train station.
Which station was this?
Furnace Shibek. Furnace Shibek, Sin El Fil. It was called the train station of NBT. We went in with one of the railway drivers. We turned on the train. We drove the green train you're talking about for more than 2 kilometers. It's this big, the train station. We drove it. I drove it. I was there.
No one saw you running a train?
They saw us. We whistled the train, but that was before they knew who we are. They didn't know yet. The potential, the energy of train became strong in 2012.
You got a train to run for 2 kilometers.
Yes.
You brought the battery. You made it happen.
Me and my friends.
Yes, and her
we
uncle.
used to drive those trains, and we drove this train.
You may be the last person
Who drove a
drove
train?
a train.
Yeah. And we whistled the train, and we were trying to they say عم نستفزهم. Okay, but at the time there was.
But how is it still running?
It was
Years and
bought
years and
in
years.
1977, right after the Civil War. So it was new. There's nothing there to be repaired. Even the oil, which has.
But even the tracks, you could navigate the tracks even after 30,
it's
40
only
years
grass,
of
only grass.
only grass.
Yeah, we took the risk. It was you don't have any slopes. You don't have any curves. It was an easy in and out, and it was just a shutter movement inside the train station.
And what happened when you reached 2 kilometers?
We came back. And I am sure up until now, the railway, the person that was managing the railway company, which was another one, not the one we have now, and all the railway workers, up until now, they have no clue that we did this.
Really?
Yep.
No one noticed the train running?
It's a dinosaur in the middle of the city. No one noticed this. Yes.
I'm guessing this was late at night. And
It was in the middle of the day.
oh, come on, you're kidding me.
Yes.
I don't believe this. It's amazing. Wow.
Yeah. And I put
Wow.
it as my profile picture on Facebook.
Do you mind if I share that photo? Could I upload the photo
it's
to
on Facebook.
Okay,
My first profile picture. You
okay,
will see
I want
That's how old
yeah.
it is.
Well,
But it's just me, a close-up of me driving the train, but you can't see the train. The train pictures are with my friend, and we, in respect for this old man who is a railway worker, and we don't want to hurt him, we kept this for ourselves.
wow. Since that train last moved, I'm guessing no trains have moved in the country.
No.
That's it.
Yeah.
Well, you are the definition of hope because you were hopeful enough to keep train running for many years, even when things were falling apart a few years ago with the You Stink protest. Things have been falling apart for many years, but you kept the NGO alive. You maybe in a way made a dream come true. You brought the train system back to life for a few minutes, one day, and you're still helping anyone, whether they're students at universities or anyone who's curious about this network and what it meant for Lebanon and what it still means for Lebanon, what it means for rebuilding this country. I think you have a lot of passion, a lot of hope, and I want to thank you for sharing that hope with us today.
Thank you.
Hope seems to be the key, and it takes a lot of hope, especially in a country where rail has been neglected for decades. And Train NGO is still pursuing that noble goal. They are still determined to make the state see rail as a necessity and to alleviate the traffic pains of Lebanon. And they're doing it this weekend. There will be a bus service from the Marem Khail train station in Beirut to Rayak. I recommend joining them. You'll get to walk along the Sofar train line, and you'll actually get to make it to Rayak and celebrate the commemoration, 124 years of the Beirut-Damascus line opening. The Turkish government was interested in redeveloping the line from Tripoli in the north into Turkey. Of course, that project was abandoned with the Syrian war beginning. The Chinese government has expressed recent interest in enhancing and fixing and developing our rail network, and that is still in its infancy. Nothing has been decided yet, but the issue is alive. Now, there is also talk of expanding the Jounieh Highway between Nahr el-Kalb all the way to Casino. And adding an extra lane there does not seem to be the correct way of alleviating the massive congestion feeding in and out of Beirut, particularly during rush hour. Combination of many things. Perhaps an additional lane can be one small component of a larger, massive rethinking of transport in Lebanon. A train line is essential to alleviating that congestion. Without it, it is simply a short-term remedy for long-term pain. And adding an extra lane in Jounieh will lead to at least a decade of additional traffic. Urban transport, or urban planning for that matter, is poor in Lebanon, and it's really felt in Beirut. The post-war landscape, the post-war reconstruction of Beirut is controversial to say the least. The architectural heritage that made the city famous is very difficult to find today. And the passion that Elias has for trains is similar to the passion Muna al-Halla has for urban planning and architecture. And Muna al-Halla is most famous for saving and helping restore a building along the Green Line, the Barakat building. And she is very active in having us keep a collective memory of what Beirut looked like before the war, particularly downtown, and primarily Martyrs Square. She is very, very active on that front. She ran for the municipality elections. She is leading a Ras Beirut initiative today at AUB, and she is still involved in the Beit Beirut project, the Barakat building that she helped save. So, her hope and her passion and her dreams are similar to Elias Maalouf. And next week, we'll jump into urban planning and heritage with Muna al-Halla. Until next time, I'm Rani Shatah, and this is the Beirut Banyan.